Welcome back. Right, well, now we've got a guest on the show.
Right.
We got Wesley Ham from Bristol Radical History Group.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for getting me on.
That's right, Wes. Right, so we've got him on because he's been doing some stuff on last year's riots, which is it sparks our interest, doesn't it?
Definitely, yeah. So you've written an article about it in a magazine called Alphaben, and you've got sort of a few ideas that are a bit different to what the official version of what happened is.
Yeah, well, the reason I did it is because if you actually look at what happened during riots, it always happens every time there's a load of riots in Britain, is basically everybody comes out, media, politicians, journalists, all start talking about it, and they usually don't know what's happened.
They weren't there.
They weren't
there, man.
They weren't really there. They've watched a bit of telly. They come on and they start making statements about, it was gangs or feral youth or criminals. And this happens a lot. So basically what I'm saying is that when you look at riots, you have to go and find out what happened before you start making statements about them, which is what I tried to do, along with a couple of other people who are helping research it.
Good stuff. And so I suppose because like there's always loads of agendas in this, isn't there? Like you could saw that. I mean, we talked about it back in, what was it, show number 4 or something like that?
Yeah.
That, straight away there was that Twitter campaign saying, oh, vermin, and, like fucking, what is it, spray them with rubber bullets from helicopters. And, there was like a big law and order sort of thing came out of it. But it was more complicated than that, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the newspapers, you can kind of divide things into two. So, what most of the newspapers were saying. And the most interesting ones are the red tops, like The Sun in particular, and Daily Star and others like that, because they kind of said this thing, well, you might have noticed they kind of built up this whole thing about millionaires' daughters being involved in it, ballerinas, Olympic ambassadors, estate agents, actors from Harry Potter films and stuff like that. And so what they were trying to do was sort of say, look, you know what, when you take law and order away, when you take these things away, everybody's bad underneath. Anybody can be a criminal, whether you're a millionaire or somebody on the street, and so everybody's the same, and they all go crazy when the law and order's taken away. And that was kind of what they were saying. That's why they said that. But a more sophisticated approach was the other one, which is the kind of your Daily Telegraphs and your Daily Mails and stuff like that, where they were sort of saying things. Well, no, it's not that we're all a bit mad. There's a particular group of people in society, these hardcore,
the
underclass of criminals who at the moment there's an opportunity will go out and do things. So they're kind of saying something slightly different, and that can be like, it's because people haven't got much money, or it could be because they're like, hardcore criminals, which is basically what the government said. And then the third thing, which kind of came along with that, was the gangs.
Right.
Gangs were behind it. It was said very early on, before the riots had even finished,
Definitely,
by David Cameron. So,
Blackberries.
yeah, so it was all gangs. So there were kind of these things put out in the media, and what I always find really funny is that they were all put out before anybody knew anything about it. Nobody knew who was involved, really, unless you were involved in it yourself. So
that was it. I mean, like, well, we are
David Cameron was out looting or something. I don't know.
Well, these Tories, not Lib Dems. We tend to blame the Lib Dems for the riots on this show, don't we?
We do. I mean, like you're saying, we made, at the time, we were making our guesstimates of what the reasons were, why it happened, who was involved. But it's like you say, it's not evidence based. It's based on our prejudgments.
Yeah, it's Starkey logic, as we like to call it.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Starkey, he's one of yours. He's a historian, isn't he?
Yeah, unfortunately, but some might debate how good a historian he is. But he's certainly good at making a fool of himself.
So, like, sort of, there was like the Guardian report came out, and they sort of, and then there was a government report, the police report, which is always the funniest. But like, sort of, the figures did start to come out, didn't they? Like, sort of what actually people being processed, and they made a lot about that, didn't they? That like, all these people have had convictions before. Like you were saying about like the sort of played to that Daily Mail thing of like there was a hardcore element behind it, kind of thing. So what figures have you seen?
Well, the interesting thing was most of the figures came out at the end of October last year, but when you actually look at the figures, they're very interesting. And funny enough, the police kind of spotted the problem with it all, because what they said is that I think there was about 2,000 people brought to court.
Right.
Certainly by the early part of this year, but by the end of last year, and what they said was 75% of them have got a previous criminal record or a caution. Therefore, the people in the riots were all criminals, right? And the problem is that, as became very clear, The police had 250,000 hours of CCTV footage, and it took them more than 6 months to look at it. So well before, looked at all the CCTV, they seem to have arrested a lot of people.
Mm.
And of course, the people they arrested first were the ones that they had CCTV footage of and a photograph to compare it to.
Yeah.
So obviously people who had criminal records. So the police are quite open about this. They went out and arrested lots of people in gangs that they already had investigations against, regardless of whether they're involved in the riots or not. They also arrested everybody they had pictures of already, who were already criminals. And then after all of that, they said, look, it's all criminals.
Mm.
Now the problem with that is, what about the thousands of other people who weren't arrested? And also, of the people they arrested, they let half of them go.
That's the other thing, isn't it? Yeah,
they don't tell you about 4,000 people nicked, 2,000 taken to court. So the whole point is if, the example is this: if David Cameron stood up right at the end of those riots and had said, traffic wardens are behind the feral traffic wardens are behind
rogue element in the
rogue elements of traffic wardens are behind the riots, right? And if the Prime Minister says that, because he said it was gangs, but he says traffic wardens, let's say, then you'd expect the police to go out and arrest a large number of traffic wardens and question them. But it would be a bit silly if you then released got the arrest figures and said, 50% of the people who are arrested are traffic wardens. Therefore, the traffic wardens are behind the riots. And that's basically what's been going on. So we don't really know who was involved. We only know about those who were arrested, and those people arrested were the ones the police already knew.
Yeah. And on the arrest figures, I know that sort of before on the show we talked about there was this idea, especially in the public's mind, that it was like sort of young black kids, like sort of that were doing it all, kind of thing, and that led to that reaction of like the EDL coming out and fucking like sort of in London and all that, defending their areas, but like,
and also Starkey's logic as well.
Totally.
True.
It's
all black culture. We didn't have riots before black culture, and
Well, again, Starkey made those comments before there was any information at all, and I'm sure Starkey's out with his posse in Hackney or whatever, and knows fully well what that culture's all about and is all involved in it. So no, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
No.
And the reason is that nobody really knew at that stage what was going on unless you were really out there involved in it yourself. And the other thing to say is, of course, all across the country there was trouble, 66 local authorities, but riots are different in different places. So, you've got to be careful about trying to characterise the whole thing in a particular way. It was down to people buying some, rap records or something. It's like it's a bit stupid.
Yeah.
And Starkey is a bit of an idiot when it comes down to things like this.
Totally, isn't it?